In-depth radio.
Here you go.
This is Jerry Agar on News Talk 1010.
So Saturday in the park and around Toronto, Occupy Toronto, an attack on Bay Street. What's the point? Still trying to figure it out. Some people saying, well, you know, they do have a point, sort of, kind of, if we understand it properly. So in an attempt to understand this further, I'm joined by Rubina Ahmed-Haq, who is dressed all in black with a balaclava on and a cinder block in her left hand, ready to go.
How do you know that, Jerry?
I can see right through the radio. Rubina Ahmed-Haq from alwayssavemoney.ca. So you think that in the midst of all of this, there is a point?
There is a point, but I think that there is a lot of resentment right now in the Canadian economy. I mean, just like the United States, a lot of us are still unemployed, and a lot of us who are employed are what we call underemployed. So we're not working as much as we did 3-4 years ago, or we're not making as much money as we did 3-4 years ago. And people are annoyed because 2-3 years ago, when the economic crisis happened, a lot of people thought, well, governments are going to step in, they're going to, tighten the reins on the banks, we're not going to see this kind of activity happening anymore. But what we've seen is CEOs get golden parachutes, huge severance packages to retire. Banks continue to make record profits. And the people, the middle class, is left still wondering, well, when are we going to get a handout and get a leg up to get back on our feet? And it hasn't happened. So really, I mean, Canada isn't to blame for what happened in the global economy, but the frustration is the same here in Canada, and I think that's why it's attracting so many people to Bay Street on Saturday.
Yeah, Saturday seems like the perfect day to go after Bay Street bankers.
Well, I have a really great example. I spoke to a friend of mine, she's a trader, and she told me that many years ago when there was a similar type of protest on Bay Street, all the protesters showed up at 9 o'clock in the morning to stop all the traders from going in to the big, tall buildings. The fact is, traders go to work at about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, so they watched them from, their towers. It was kind of, I guess, amusing for them to see that people had showed up so late. And all the protesters are gone by 3 o'clock, and nobody really was disrupted. And that's kind of what's happening on Saturday. Who exactly are you sending the message to? Those towers are empty. Do it on a weekday when everybody's at work and can actually hear your voice.
Yeah, but here is one of the large problems that they have. Well, there's no question that a lot of responsible writers, people that I read all the time, are not gung-ho leftists, and they're saying, on the other hand, there is a point that we have a problem in how the banks operated and that they sort of got bailed out for a problem they created themselves and all of that. But I got a text message from my son, and I read it on the air earlier this morning. He got to school. He's grade 10, okay? He got to school. He writes back, one of my friends says he's going to Occupy Toronto tomorrow to protest. I asked him what he was protesting, and he said he didn't know.
I think that's what happened at G20 as well. A lot of people showed up on the streets. There was a few people that were actually, organizing these protests and leading them, and a lot of people were there as spectators. They didn't really know why they were there and got caught up in this excitement. And as we know how it all went down with cars being burned, I really hope that's not what happens on Saturday. But I mean, a lot of the people are young people, and the fact is, Jerry, the young people are the ones that are the highest right now when it comes to unemployment. This summer we saw a lot of students were unable to get those normal seasonal jobs because they just simply do not exist. So there's a lot of young people with a lot of time on their hands, and when they have that, they start to go to things like Occupy Toronto or Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street movement. They have time for things like that. That's really the reality right now in our society.
Rubina Ahmed-Haq of alwayssavemoney.ca is with me. Lauren Gunter in the Post today writes, Rubina, Wall Street protesters have a point, but their left-wing solutions would only make things worse. This is the problem I see with the protests. They don't really have a good idea of how to fix things.
Well, most protesters, they never really have concrete ideas of how exactly governments or top officials can fix things. Most of them are just out there because they're angry. And I think people have a right when they're angry to raise their voice, to say they've been overlooked, to say that, they need to have somebody pay attention to their situation. It is the job of our top officials, of our government officials who sit in Ottawa, to start helping people who are unemployed or underemployed to start getting out of debt, to start getting back into better jobs. And I think that this is just a message to them that, Canadians, yes, we are not like the Americans. We are not in the same situation, but there's still a lot of people that really have been struggling for the last 2 or 3 years. And I bet you there are people in that protest who 3-4 years ago had great paying jobs, maybe in the auto industry or other organizations that have been completely decimated, or industries rather, completely decimated, that are actually at this protest that 4 years ago would have said, no way, I'll never go to a protest like that.
Yeah, but Lauren Gunter writes that the occupiers have convinced themselves that the only way to a fairer society lies through bigger government, more public spending, and much higher taxes, all of which would only make our economic problems worse.
That's one opinion. I think that what really the message is that something has to change, that we have for the last 2-3 years just been seeing a lot more of the same. And the solution that the governments keep coming out with are throw more money at the situation. They're not looking more long term. I think provincially and federally especially, we need to start looking at a long-term solution for the economy. So where do we want our auto industry to be 5 years from now? Not let's just throw some money on it and get it revived again. I think that is the major problem. So whether that means more government intervention, whether that means higher taxes, I don't know. I'm not an economist, and I wouldn't want to comment on that. But I think something has to be different than what's been happening in the last 3 years. That's what people are really peeved about.
Yeah, and I think there's a bunch of misinformation coming out from this movement that is being accepted as reality, and I want to take that up with you in just a moment. Rubina Ahmed-Haq with me from alwaysavemoney.ca. It's 10:45. News Talk 1010, Time Saver Traffic. I'm Jerry Agar. This is In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010. There's going to be a debate on this Occupy Toronto issue. One person from the Bay Street side, so to speak, and one from the Occupy Toronto movement coming up at 2:30 this afternoon on the showgram with Jim Richards. So be with us for that. In the middle of the action tomorrow as Ted broadcasts from 11 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon from we're not sure where yet because we're not sure exactly what's going to happen, but we'll have our mobile studio out there with him in it. Rubina Ahmed-Haq is with me from alwaysavemoney.ca. Maybe they'd be better off, Rubina, if they would have put on Occupy Job Fair.
Yeah, or I mean, I guess you could argue in all different types of ways, but I think the real reason is that this movement has gained so much popularity in such a short amount of time. A lot of people just want to get involved. And Jerry, did you know that this actually, the roots of it started in Canada, this Occupy Wall Street movement?
I did not.
It started with an ad that was put out by Adbusters, which is a Canadian organization, and then it was picked up by somebody in the States, which then eventually became the Occupy Wall Street movement. And now, in a sense, it's coming back to Canada, if you think about it. But
all right.
It's morphed into something different, definitely.
Sure. And one of the things that they like to push, and I've heard from a number of people, Rubina, using this statistic, and they're trying to point out to me that I ought to be with these people because I'm one of the 99%, that 1% of the population controls all the wealth. But I'm going back again to Lauren Gunter here, where he points out that according to the Internal Revenue Service in the United States, the 99%ers, as they call themselves, all the ordinary people, actually control 80% of the income. And people should also be aware that while we have rich people and poor people and middle-class people in Canada and the United States, as a matter of fact, as citizens in North America, we are among the top 7% of earners in the world. So, other people could look at us and say, how come you're so rich?
Well, there's a stat out there that says if you have change in your pocket, you are the richest 10% in the world. Can you believe it? I mean, there are people that are suffering so much more. There are people that are suffering.
Hey, Rubina, listen to the wealth.
Yeah, but that's the sad reality. I mean, I understand that North Americans still have it a lot better than the poor people who are still suffering from famine. There's floods in Thailand. I mean, there's terrible things happening all over the world. But this specific movement, I think, has really started with people in the beginning were very sympathetic with what was happening around the world, and they wanted to work together. 3 years later, the middle class, which in Canada is 70%, is now starting to think, well, why should the big banks continue to make profits and I still haven't got a job? And why should, in the United States, the banks that created all these problems by calling their investment products too sophisticated for us to understand, why should they be getting millions of dollars of severance packages? I think that is the core of the problem, where it's not really that the middle class is suffering so much that we're all on food stamps. It's really that we're looking from the outside and saying, why are those people still getting so many breaks when they're the ones that created the problems? I think that is the core of what people are angry about.
Great email I just received from a listener, Steve, who says, here we have these people running around complaining about unemployment and how come I don't have a job, but the mayor of Calgary came to Toronto to tell us how Alberta needs more workers.
Of course. I mean, there's an argument for everything. I mean, if people want to move to Calgary and start working in the oil industry there, I am sure there are lots of jobs out there. But I think that there are a lot of people right now who lost their jobs at a point in their life when they were in their mid-40s or 50s, their skills are out of date, they don't want to go back to school to maybe learn a new trade, whatever the issue might be. There are a lot of good people that had good paying jobs that were unfairly affected by this global crisis. They had nothing to do with it. They had nothing to do with what was happening on Wall Street. And I think that is the resentment that still remains, is that these people who were hardworking their entire lives, maybe somebody who's listening right now, were laid off because their company didn't hire their finances properly or bet on something that didn't go the way they thought it would. And then now they're suffering because they don't have a job. Their unemployment has run out and they can't get the same kind of salary that they had 2-3 years ago. And that's where it really comes from. I mean, there's lots of examples of places around the world where you could go and get jobs. I mean, I guess if the going gets tough, you can go anywhere. But people are just upset that their situation no one has done anything to change their situation. Well, yeah,
but they also have to do something to change their situation. I mean, you're not going to get much sympathy from me. I've traveled around 2 countries trying to keep myself employed. And, I was certainly, especially having lived in the United States recently, could count myself, if I wanted to think about it this way all the time, a victim of that whole circumstance as well. But I can also look forward and say, what can I do to improve my situation? And while there may be some point, Rubina, to what these people have to say tomorrow, they're the wrong messengers.
They are the wrong messengers, but I think the underlying message that something has to give, something has to change, still remains. And there has been this sense where Canadians, we're somehow protected from everything else that's happening around the world because of our great banking system and governments making all these decisions that protected us. But the fact is that we are still in record amounts of debt. There's so much debt around the world, Jerry, that something eventually is going to crack, and that's when we're going to see that sort of deeper global recession that everyone keeps talking about. Everybody owes everybody money, and that cannot be a good economic system. We need to get back to basics where we make something, we sell it, we make a profit, we take that money, we make something else. We need to get back to the basics of how an economy runs, and we need to stop being in so much debt.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, but let's be careful, and this is why these people are the wrong message. Let's be careful while we're doing that to not demonize the people who make products, the people who create businesses, who are the people who are going to eventually pull us out of this. Because most of us need jobs. Only a few of us can actually create jobs. It's not the government. It's entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. It's brave people, and they shouldn't be attacked when they are successful doing it.
And I think that those are the people right now that, if they have unfortunately lost their job at a big corporation, who are now thinking, I had a great idea, and now I'm going to actually make it happen. And those are the people that are going to be more successful in 5 or 6 years because they're taking their destiny into their own hands, so to speak. And I really do want to make it clear, I do not support the Occupy Wall Street movement, and I do not 100% think that what they're doing is right, but I understand where that resentment is coming from. I think that's really where I stand when it comes to that. And I think Jim Flaherty also understands it. He came out yesterday saying, they have a legitimate reason to be frustrated, but don't point the fingers at us. It's not always, it's not really Canada's fault. This is something that is a global problem that is affecting, unfortunately, Canadians as well.
Rubina Ahmed-Haq, alwayssavemoney.ca. We've linked to her page through mine at newstalk1010.com. Good to talk to you. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Jerry.
All right.